Now I'm going to take that arrangement of Amazing Grace from part 1, break it into pieces, and explain what each of those pieces does. Again, you don't need to remember everything I'm going to tell you. I'm just giving you a preview of what we'll cover over the course of many videos. So, if you take a score like this, and you take away all of the notes and all of the symbols and all of the words, you're left with this grid in the background. 2 sets of 5 lines. And as I said in part 1, the top set is for the right hand, the bottom set is for the left hand. Well, in this piece, the right hand is playing up here, and the left hand's playing down here. And we need some way of showing that on the score, because it could be that both hands are playing up here, which does happen, or both hands are playing down here. So that's where these symbols come in. The top one tells you that the right hand is playing in the top half of the piano, and the bottom one tells you that the left hand is playing in the bottom half of the piano. We'll spend more time on those symbols in the next video. Now we're ready to add some notes to the score, but instead of just adding complete notes, I'm only going to add the blobs at the end of notes. These are the most important things in any music score because they tell you which notes to play. For instance, if I put a note on this line, it's telling me to play this note on the keyboard, or if I put a note on this line, it's telling me to play this one. This is actually what early sheet music looked like. It was just blobs on a page, so everything else in a score is something that's been added since then. One thing to note is that you can have blobs on lines or on spaces, so they don't just go on lines. That's really important because if you take these 2 notes, for instance, here they're both on lines that are next to each other, so it might look like those 2 notes are next to each other. But if I play them on the keyboard, you can see that they're actually 2 notes apart. And that's because you could put another note on the space in between. So notes go on lines or spaces. Well, if you just put notes on a blank score like this, they're all going to come out as white notes. So how do you write black notes? Well, you do that by writing a white note and putting a symbol in front of it that changes it into one of the black notes next to it. So let's do a couple of examples of that. If we write this on the score, that's telling us to play this note, but we want to play this one. So we put this symbol in front of it, which tells us to change this white note into the black note just below. Or to use another example, if we write this in the score, that's telling us to play this note, but this time we want to play the black note just above, so we put a different symbol in front that tells us to change this white note to the black note just above it. So 2 different symbols. One tells you to change a white note to the black note just below, and the other tells you to change a white note to the black note just above it. We'll spend more time with those symbols later. For now, I just want to give you a preview of what's to come, so don't feel you have to remember all of this. Now, a lot of the time, you'll see a bunch of these symbols at the beginning of each line of a score. That happens when you want to change all the notes on a particular line or space to black notes. If you see a score like that, don't try to play it for the time being. We'll go over that in a much later tutorial. There is one more symbol like that which we should cover, which is this 3rd one. And all that does is it cancels the previous one. So the middle symbol told us to change this white note into the black note just above, and the last one is telling us to change it back to the white note. Well, we now have all of the notes of Amazing Grace in place, but if we wrote them like this, they'd come out sounding like this. So what we need is some way of showing that some notes are longer than others, because Amazing Grace should sound like this. Short, long, short, short, long, short, long, short, long. So that is what all of these things do. Whether a note is empty or whether it's filled in, whether a note has a line on it or not, all of the notes in this piece have lines on them, but that isn't always true. Whether notes are joined together, whether a note has a dot after it or not, all of these things tell you how long a note lasts. And if you're thinking that's confusing, you are absolutely right. It's a really, really terrible system for telling you how long notes last. But unfortunately, it's the system we've got, and it's a bit late to go and change all the music scores in the world, so we just have to stick with it. But when I teach it to you, I'll teach it to you in such a way that it makes it feel easy. So we now have something that sounds like Amazing Grace, but when we look at the score, all of the notes kind of run together. It's a little as if you were writing English but you didn't have gaps between the words. It would be very hard to read. So that's where these lines come in. They don't in any way change how you play the piece. They just break the piece up into sections of equal length, and they make it easier to read. Then these numbers at the beginning just tell you how long each section is, using a slightly complicated system, so don't worry too much about that for the time being. So now that the piece is split into boxes, you can see that we have some empty boxes. But we don't want all of them to be empty. Now if I play the opening, you'll see what I mean. So what happened there is that when I got to the third box in the score, the third box is empty in the left hand, but when I played the piece, I was still holding on to those two notes. So let me show you again. So here, I still have those two notes down. So I don't want that box to be empty in the score. And the way we deal with that is we just write those two notes in the third box, and then we put these curved lines in to show that I'm holding on to those notes rather than just playing them again. So that's what's going on there. And that happens a few times in the score. However, in other places where we have empty boxes, we do actually want them to be empty. For instance, at the very beginning, when the right hand plays the first note, the left hand isn't doing anything. So we do want that first box to be empty in the left hand before the left hand starts playing with those two notes. So that's what this symbol does. This symbol just tells you that we're leaving that bit empty on purpose. It's a bit like in an exam when you have this page left deliberately blank. That also happens in a couple of other places in the score. And you'll notice that all of those symbols look different. The reason for that is just that the gaps that they represent are different lengths, so there are different symbols for them. So just as you have notes that look different depending on how long they last, gaps look different depending on how long they last as well. Well, now we're getting really close to a complete score. Next thing to do is add these numbers. These are actually pretty simple. What they do is they tell you which fingers to play the notes with. So in piano playing, all of your fingers have numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you can tell someone playing a piece which finger they should use to play a note by putting numbers on it. So that's all they do. Then we have these big curves. Now these are different from the small ones that we did a moment ago. What these do is they break a tune down into phrases. So what do I mean by that? Well, Amazing Grace has words to it. As you probably know, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, and so on. And those words split into lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, if we put those lines in the music, here they are. Line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. We can put these curves above them just to show where each line of the lyrics fall in the music. And those curves stay in place even if you don't have the words in the music. So that's what I mean by those big curves break the tune down into phrases. Now we're just one step away from having a complete score. The last thing to do is add a couple more numbers, those funny symbols, and those bits of Italian words I talked about earlier. And all of these things do is they just tell you how to play a piece, whether to play it faster or slower, louder or quieter. All of these things don't change the notes you play, but they change how you play them. The reason lots of the words are in Italian is just for historical reasons. So if you want to read music, you do have to learn a few Italian words, but that's not a bad thing. So this concludes our whistle-stop tour of music notation. We started with the grid in the background. We threw some notes on top, added some rhythm, and then finished up with some symbols. And if that's all sounding like a lot of work, then I have some good news for you, which is that if you can just learn to read the blobs and you have a good recording of the piece, then you can actually learn to play a piece to a pretty high level of accuracy. A lot of music teachers will possibly kill me for saying that, but it's true, so I may as well tell you. So if you're not sure whether you want to read music or not, or if you find it scary, please just stick with me for the next few videos where I'll teach you to read the blobs, and then you can decide if you want to carry on learning.